Now, perhaps one of our favorite ways to maintain sweet potatoes in a small growing space is to grow them vertically. If I have a long enough growing season, I could easily see a single sweet potato plant take up 60 square feet of space. Guten Yardening, everybody! In today's video, I want to talk about maintaining sweet potato plants in a small garden space. Sweet potatoes are one of our favorite vegetables to grow here at Guten Yardening, but we have to admit, given our tiny space, and including our house, we have about 0.13 acres, we have to be really conscientious about the amount of space anything that we plant takes up. And sweet potatoes have the ability, depending on the length of the growing season, to really expand. Most of the sweet potato varieties that we plant are vining varieties, which means that their stems can extend out 10 to 12 feet at least. Now, we're in Zone 5, Wisconsin, which means our growing season is shorter than some of you in those higher numbered zones. And so your sweet potato plants could possibly get even bigger. So how do we make sure that they're not taking up too much space? How do we maintain those vines? Well, one of the first things that you can do is invest in a bush type variety of sweet potato. The sweet potato plants you're seeing right here are a great example of a bush variety of sweet potato. This varieties variety grows to about 3 feet. Now, that's a far cry from the 60 square feet that you can get from a single vining sweet potato plant. And so this type of sweet potato, just like a bunch Puerto Rico, which we've also grown, another really common bush variety, is a great option if you're not looking to do some of the other things that we're going to suggest in this video. One thing that's going to make clear what I'm talking about here is when I show you the difference between the size of this plant, this is the varieties still, and some of our vining varieties already. This season, all the varieties we're growing except for that varieties sweet potato are vining varieties. And unlike the bush type varieties, these love to crawl. In fact, if you look along the base of this bed, and we are fortunate enough to have about 120 square feet that we've dedicated to sweet potatoes in this bed alone. But if you look at the base of the bed here, you can see all those really long vines that these are sending out. Here, I can pull this up, and you can see this is probably about 3.5 feet long already, this single vine, and they are all along the bed. Well, given how common these vining varieties are, how can we maintain them in a smaller space? Well, there are a couple of suggestions that I have for you, and they're pretty simple. Now, in order to understand my first suggestion, I think it's really important to know how these vining type sweet potatoes grow. These vining sweet potatoes love to crawl along the ground as they grow. What they're hoping for is to come into contact with the soil beneath, because at each one of these leaves you'll see a node right here. You see this little white spot? If that comes into contact with the ground, you can see it on both sides actually. If that comes into contact with the ground, you're going to get the formation of new roots, which is going to potentially, if you live in one of those warmer growing zones, it's going to potentially lead to a larger harvest. But the challenge is then that this will continue to spread. You'll get new development of roots. It will continue to grow. It's much like a winter squash in that way. Well, one of the things that we want to do if we're growing in a smaller space is we want to avoid that contact with the ground. So an easy way to avoid that contact, and one way to maintain the amount of space your sweet potato plants are taking up, is to just toss the vine back onto the plant itself. That's not actually going to hurt the plant at all. And it's probably one of the easiest ways to make sure your plant isn't taking up any excess space out of whatever bed you have it planted in. Now, that's super simple. It's not going to hurt your plant, but one of the things it's going to do is it's going to create a denser amount of leaves on top of the plant. And in my opinion, that's going to reduce some of the air circulation and airflow and potentially increase the likelihood for disease. And so a second option here for maintenance is to do something like we did, which is to create a minimalistic trellising system. So we just have some of these T-posts here. These are 7-foot T-posts, and we have some inexpensive wire, and this is at about 3.5 feet of height above the bed. Now, I mentioned the sweet potato plants like to crawl along the ground. They're not really trellising plants. They don't send out tendrils like a squash or a grapevine, but you can still lay them over top of a trellising system. So once this vine is 6 or 8 inches longer, it'll loop right over top and rest on this system, and I can continue that process. So with this method, we're not cutting back any leaves, we're not trimming or pruning the plant back at all, we're just allowing there to still be plenty of air circulation, and we can kind of grow these in a vertical way. And one of the benefits of doing this is that all along here, these nodes where those roots could possibly pop out, they're not going to form. And so we're going to get that focused growth at the main part of our plant where we planted our slip. So that should help us, especially those of us in shorter growing seasons who don't have enough time to allow those newer roots to form good sweet potatoes. Now, a third way to maintain these vining sweet potato plants is to come in and cut off the apical end. That's the end that's growing out from the stem here. And the reason we would do that is to create a bushier type of plant from a vining variety. You can think of this like topping off some peppers. You can create a bushier pepper plant when you do this. So let's take a look at the difference between a stem that has the apical end still on it and one where we've removed the apical end. For the vine that still has the apical end attached, you can see at each node there is no additional stem development. Now this vine has had the end removed for about 2 weeks, and you can see at each node now we've got some development of additional stems coming out, but we have no further development in terms of length of this plant. So what we're doing, again, much like topping a pepper, we've given a signal by cutting off that apical end back down the rest of this vine for it to start developing a bushier type of production on that stem that already exists. Now this technically could continue to grow out if you allowed it to come into contact later on as this develops with the soil, but what we're essentially doing here is creating more of a bush style sweet potato from this vining plant. And since you're not trimming back a whole bunch of green leaves as the vine is growing, you shouldn't impact the overall production of the plant because it's still going to be developing new leaf structure for photosynthesis. Now, we don't typically recommend you go and prune your sweet potato plants because that can inhibit some of the sweet potato growth that you're looking for by the end of the season. However, you can see there are a massive number of leaves on these plants, and if you wanted to take 1 or 2 off in order to enjoy them, because they are very tasty. Personally, I like to eat them just steamed. Anytime I'm cutting off some of our sweet potato slips that we've propagated, there's always a couple of leaves that I have to cut off at the bottom. I don't let those go to waste. I just gather them together, put them in a steamer, and enjoy. I think they taste like spinach. But definitely go easy on that because you do not want to take off too many leaves. Again, you don't want to stunt the production of your sweet potato plants because while the leaves are delicious, our end goal are those nice sized sweet potato roots. Now, perhaps one of our favorite ways to maintain sweet potatoes in a small growing space is to grow them vertically. Here we have multiple varieties grown in an original GreenStalk vertical garden setup here. We have our vining varieties toward the top and our bush varieties down toward the bottom. And with this method, the vines can cascade down the entire height of the vertical garden, and then we can use some of the other methods that we talk about in this video in order to keep them in this smaller space. So if you have minimal growing space, this could be a great option for you. Consider all the sweet potatoes you could maintain in under 2 square feet of horizontal growing space. So yes, vertical sweet potatoes are a definite way to maintain a large amount of sweet potatoes in minimal space. Using these methods is how we're able to maintain sweet potato plants even in these smaller containers. I mean, this is a 17 or 18 gallon container. We've got 3 sweet potato slips in here. This is a vining variety sweet potato. You can see the vine starting to head out here. And all we're gonna do for this one is just toss it right back on top. Sweet potatoes are one of those vegetables that are just so essential in our garden space. We don't want you to miss out on them thinking that you just don't have the space. There are certainly ways that we've gone over now that you can use to maintain your sweet potatoes in a smaller area. The way we look at it, if we can do it here at Guten Yardening, you can too. Well, we hope you found this video useful today. I can tell you that the more we have grown sweet potatoes, the more we're convinced that they are for everybody. If you did enjoy today's video, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.